Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton Agenda AWANI, kekal duduk di rumah, kekal tenang dan bersama kita putuskan rantaian jangkitan COVID-19. Jumlah kes baru semakin menurun, bukan saja kekal 2 angka lebih seminggu tetapi kini turun di bawah tahap 50 kes sehari dan kes yang discharge ataupun pulih harian juga semakin konsisten lebih tinggi daripada kes baru jangkitan. Semua ini membawa kepada kita kepada harapan normal baharu ketika mana walaupun kita mungkin sudah lepas fasa PKP atau MCO itu, tetapi kita masih perlu mengamalkan banyak perkara baru dan inovasi perkara baru. Namun macam mana nak buat perkara baru kalau ramai yang tidak berjaya hidup selepas era PKP atau semasa era PKP dalam erti kata ikhtiar mencari nafkah dan ikhtiar perniagaan mereka. Ya, rancangan stimulus banyak dikeluarkan tapi ada segmen masyarakat Malaysia yang berpendapat bahawa golongan yang dipanggil syarikat pemula ataupun startup memerlukan tumpuan yang lebih spesifik, lebih mensasar kepada nasib dan juga keperluan mereka. Oleh itu saya ingin minta izin berbicara dalam bahasa Inggeris. This is because I have two very illustrious name in the world of startups and funding and technopreneurship in Malaysia. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Sivapalan Vivakaja. I've known him especially since the late 1990s, and then we've had brushes here and there through the media. He's now the co-founder and senior partner of Scale Up Malaysia, an accelerator. But Dr. Siva, anybody who whether in 90s, the first decade of the 21st century, or now would know of him because he has always been around. He's worn many hats. But today he'll be joined with Mr. Aaron Sarma, also the co-founder and general partner of Scale Up Malaysia. Thank you so much, Aaron, also for making time. This is my first time with you online, also with Dr. Siva. I'm just going to cut through the chase. I'm going to take out a report done by Startup Genome for the global startup economy. But I'm going to take the angle that Forbes put out in one of their articles, in which a year ago it was said that it was estimated that the global startup economy created nearly $3 trillion American dollars in economic value between 2016 and 2018. But now the billion of dollars of that economy is sipping away or going away. And this pandemic has really put a spanner into the works of many startups. That is the voice of many internationally. But locally, if you remember, Astro AWANI put it out, Magic also put out a survey of which they, I think, interviewed and surveyed about 239 startups and social enterprises from various fields and supply chains. And from their finding, about 40% of startup and social enterprises may fall if COVID-19 drags on until Hari Raya Aidilfitri. Now, Hari Raya is not that far off, so I would like to have Zulera or Magic here to look at the percentages of many, because some startup surveys said they could only survive 2 weeks, and we're way past 2 weeks already of the MCO. But we'll get to that another time. But for this time, you guys come from, funding startups. You guys come from the angle of trying to nurture startup and grow them into successful entities. Just maybe until a few years ago or a few months ago, the unicorns of the world were the talk of the city in Kuala Lumpur. We're waiting for which one of our startups is going to get that title, all that stuff. But now with the pandemic, I don't hear so much discussions about unicorns anymore. I hear more and more voices about survival. Dr. Siva, can you please start us on that?
Thank you very much, Kamaru, and thank you for having us on the program. Always happy to talk to you. We've been doing this for like 20 years. Yes, I think, if you look at even before the pandemic, if you look at it like even 6 months ago, that's when the unicorns started folding up, right? With things like WeWork and all of them starting to fold up. So I think the pandemic has just exacerbated this issue and made it a lot worse. If you look at, for example, what's happening today in the ecosystem, not just in Malaysia but everywhere, even the Startup Genome Report said that globally they expect 40% of companies to not make it past this pandemic and also the recession that's been brought on by this pandemic. And Magic had the same survey results as well, 40%. So I think generally speaking, you will find that startups by themselves, they are a very different type of entity from SMEs, right?
Yep.
Startups are actually companies that are building new technology or innovations, and they are actually trying to validate or prove their innovation in the market. So many of them don't have what we call a playbook to go by. If you start a restaurant, you have a playbook, you know what you need to do. So because they are not like that, they're very different. That's why the failure rate can be a lot higher. But that doesn't mean we mustn't do anything to help them, because they're a very important part of the future of our country.
Yeah. Doctor, forgive me for asking a very basic question.
Sure.
A lot of people think sometimes just because we have specific programs and incentives for small and medium enterprises, sometimes includes micro also, and that covers startup too. Would you make a different distinction between that kind of focus and a specific focus for startups?
Yes, absolutely. If you look at startups, they're actually very different. In the first place, most startups are actually very knowledge-based enterprises. So being knowledge-based enterprises, their biggest cost is actually knowledge workers. In fact, up to 70-80% of a startup's cost can actually be their staff, their employees. And many of them, being knowledge workers, also earn more than 4,000 ringgit a month. So many of them are earning 4,000, 6,000, 8,000. I think many years ago, even MDEC did a study, and they found that knowledge workers' average salary, even for those who are starting up, is already above 3,000, 4,000. So we look at it; they're very different. If you are, let's say, a startup, a SME in restaurants, for example, you have many other costs, food costs, and all of that. Labor cost is a very small component, and the labor staff that you pay, many of them probably earn below 4,000. Whereas in a startup, maybe the founder earns below 4,000, but all his staff will earn more than 4,000.
Bootstrapping.
Exactly. So if you look at most of the what incentives out there and the stimulus packages out there, they're talking about people earning less than 4,000. And, traditional startups. It doesn't work for startups. So startups have this issue in that the current stimulus does very little for them. Maybe the loan portion might work, but a lot of startups also cannot service loans because they're still in the very early stages. They haven't proven the product yet. So that's a big difference between startups and SMEs.
Doctor, paint us a picture. It's hard for me to find a real number of how many startups we have, especially technopreneurs and technopreneurship-based kind of startup. So what would your figures be?
So we had this discussion as well, Aaron and I, and we kind of came up with a figure of around, say, 10,000 startups. And if we are looking at 10,000, because if you look at MDEC, the agency MDEC, with their MSC status companies, and all the companies that are engaged with MDEC, with Cradle Fund, for example, with Magic. So most startups, unlike SMEs, most startups are always engaged into the ecosystem. That's one very different thing between startups and normal SMEs. And when they are engaged into the ecosystem, they are engaged with normally a lot of these agencies. So these are some of the primary agencies. Then, of course, you've got the funding agencies like MDV, MAPGAP, and so on. So we started looking at possible numbers, and we just worked out the numbers. We think there's about at least maybe 10,000 of them, so not very large. Because SMEs, they're talking about almost close to 1 million SMEs. But you're only talking about maybe 10,000 plus or minus startups, so much smaller in numbers.
All right. Okay, Aaron, so if I take Magic survey, 40% of them can't survive between first Shawwal in maybe post Hari Raya Aidilfitri. So that's 4,000 of startups in Malaysia affected. So what's the urgency here, and what do you think we can do to alleviate the situation? How bad is it?
Thanks, Kamal. Yes, I think, first of all, thank you for having me. And I think this issue is very close to our heart. We find that supporting the startups is extremely important, as Doc mentioned earlier. The thing that's really important is focusing and understanding that startups are very different from SMEs. And therefore, the way we prescribe our solutions to them need to be different. The average startup has an element of market risk, and most of these companies we discussed this in a piece we wrote recently, don't actually have a clear playbook, as Doc referenced earlier. They don't know how to build you just imagine a couple of years ago, they wouldn't know how to build an app that called a taxi to your house, right?
Okay.
And these things didn't exist before.
Yeah.
It's different from like a restaurant, for example, where in the case of a restaurant, you understand you have to have good food, good service, the pricing is be nice, located in a good place. You understand like the premise of how to build a successful restaurant business. But in a startup, nobody knew that you could not have to walk to your DVD store to get a movie. Now you can open your laptop and watch something there. So these playbooks have to be developed on the fly. Yeah. In the same survey you mentioned, there was also a follow-on survey that showed that only 3% of companies or startup companies thought they would survive the next 12 months.
Yeah.
That means out of the 10,000, a whole bunch of them may not even make it.
Yeah.
And the danger we have is that we may be throwing out the good with the bad.
Okay.
Like we could be missing the next big unicorn because we killed it before it could even get further than this.
Okay.
And so this is the opportunity we're missing. And so what we recommend is two kinds of solutions. One is to help the startups survive the crisis.
Yep.
Kind of like, life support almost during the crisis.
Okay.
And then the next part is how you need to help them thrive as they go through the recovery.
Okay. I will rest this discussion for a bit, but I'll sell my question first. We are talking about entrepreneurship. So the question I'm selling is, some people feel that if you're not strong enough to weather the highs and lows of the industry, then you deserve to melt away and be let or allowed to die, and the tough ones will survive, and they are supposed to be the ones that we look at. There's another school of thought, just because it's analogies like the pandemic, they are okay, they might be the next unicorn, but this virus make them not able to breathe on their own, especially from the cash flow perspective. So just like in the ICU, we need ventilators to help COVID patients to breathe. Startups need cash infusion to alleviate the cash flow problem, to retain their workers, and to continue to come up with good services and product. So I'm leaving it that to you, because the government doesn't have a cash deal that runs forever. The government has to look at all aspects of society. So if you are asking for that precious amount of resources to be diverted to the startups, how do we do that? In what size? And why don't we allow those who are not strong enough to just go away, and we focus on those who could survive? That is the questions, set of questions that I'm selling first. We'll see you after this short break. You are still watching Agenda AWANI. We're still tonight focusing on the new normal, and part of the new normal, a lot of people that knows things believe that we should be focusing on the startups and their issues, and the pandemic has hit them really hard. In China, Forbes article said that the Chinese venture investing has dropped over 50% relative to the rest of the world since January. In other parts of the world, still bigger, similar magnitude. 28 billion startup investment will go missing this year alone. And according to Deal Room, since the end of January, tech and internet companies in Europe has lost almost 400 billion euros in total. Now, funding, debts, and also cash flow are very crucial for startup companies. So that was the set of questions I threw to Dr. Siva and Aaron. Dr. Siva, if you can give us the highlights of how you look at this, because it's obvious from many people's perspective, especially those in technopreneurship, that they need that ventilator machine, which might mean government direct injection of cash or debts for them to be able to continue to retain workers and do what they do. But at the same time, the government has to look at a broad-based policy for everyone and social safety net, not just economy. So what are you guys proposing to maybe meet things halfway?
Okay, thank you, Cameron. So I think the first thing I want to address is, are these startups actually important now? technology advances are changing the world everywhere. The whole world is changing. The way we behave, things are changing. Business is changing. So clearly, there is a requirement for us to promote and enhance innovation and technology entrepreneurship. And these are all the startup companies that are doing this. We know, for example, that the existing large corporate companies don't do enough innovation because they're not built for innovation.
Okay.
The startups are built for innovation. They are actually changing the world. So we really do need to support them. Okay. Now, if they are going to innovate, innovation costs money. Innovation needs talent. So they need both funding and they need to make sure they keep the talent. So some of the proposals that we are recommending, is based on these two things, right? One is to support them, to help them to survive, like Aaron mentioned. And secondly, is to look forward to the recovery from the recession and COVID and to help them to then thrive and to do well.
Okay.
So in terms of surviving, you need to make sure that they don't lose all their talent. So talent is the lifeblood of a startup. So we need to make sure they don't lose their talent. But their talent all earn above 4,000 ringgit. So what our recommendation is that, to look at startups very differently from SMEs. They're all knowledge workers. So what we're recommending is a stimulus package to pay half of the cost of this talent for 6 months, right? And don't forget, the number of startups are very small, only 10,000 or so compared to like 1 million SMEs.
Okay.
So the impact actually is not that large, right? So first thing is you must support them with the talent. Secondly, you can support them with other expenditure, and primarily is rental expenditure. You take care of these two things, you're probably taking care of 80-90% of their costs already, right? So you don't have to worry about anything else. But that's on and on survivability, they will need some cash flow. And cash flow can be done via, let's say, MDB. We recommend Malaysia Debt Ventures to provide what we call debt financing, but also matching that with investment financing. So, we call it debt finance, venture debt. So if a venture capitalist or an angel invests in a company, we are recommending that that investment is matched by MDB. The good thing about that is this. When VCs and angels and accelerators are investing in companies, they are actually providing the additional support, the network, the extra talent and resources to guide them and help them to grow. And MDB can provide the additional cash flow to help them to grow. So if you do this, you're actually taking care of the survivability part of these startups. The second recommendation we are making is, to look at beyond survivability, because if you look at all the stimulus packages there, they're only looking at keeping these guys alive, keeping them and helping them to survive.
Yes.
But I think, there is an opportunity for us now to go beyond survival to help them to thrive. And one reason for that is this. In this whole region, in the whole world, a lot of startups will fail. Very few governments are doing anything to help them beyond survive. And that's where we are saying our government needs to be bold. We need to take real serious actions, not just to survive, but help them to thrive. And that's where we are recommending things like, providing support for venture capital funding, for example. We've had a lack of venture capital funding in this ecosystem for the last 5 years. There's just too little out there. So what we're encouraging is the government actually put in some money, but at a very much higher rate. So we are saying there should be matching, but the government should put in 5 and private sector puts in 1. And we're recommending 500 million from the government. Now, this might sound like a lot. I mean, you look at it, 250 million package that the government has provided so far. There's almost nothing for startup. 250 billion. There's almost nothing for startup. So 500 million actually is a small part of helping these companies to actually become regional players. Now, we want to create unicorns. We want to create regional players. You can't do that by just providing, some support for salaries or stuff. We need to look beyond. We need to make sure that, they can do well over the next 18 months, 24 months, and so on. So venture capital support should be there. And there should be more support for others, like people like angels and accelerators who are working at it from the earlier stage. So our recommendation looks at early stage and also late stage. I think if we look at it from a holistic perspective, if we do both the survival part and the thriving part, I think Malaysia will be one step ahead of all of our neighbors. And that's going to give our companies a real head start getting beyond COVID and beyond the recession. So that's really a major big picture of our recommendations.
Doctor, Singapore, for example, has always been more, should I say, generous to help their startups. They even caught our startup to be linked to them, and we all know that big brand. So how are we compared to them?
Well, the primary reason why these companies, our startups go to Singapore is because there's no funding. Right, and we always say, companies will go where the money is, right? Like bees go to honey, companies go to money.
Okay.
So if you don't provide the funding support for these companies, they cannot grow. If they need to grow, if they want to be regional players, they need funding. So if Singapore provides the funding, or VCs based in Singapore provide the funding, inevitably they need the money to grow. They will go to Singapore and get the money.
Okay.
And the Singapore government is very, very clever about it. In that, if you take money from us, you'll have to base yourself in Singapore.
Right.
Now we have told this to our government, for years.
Okay.
We need to provide additional support so that they will stay here instead of going somewhere else.
Okay, I got it.
It's a simple thing. Yeah.
Yes. So to Aaron, I would like to, combine a few questions together. Like, we're asking for about, let's say, 500 million ringgit from the government as stimulus, and hopefully private sector will match that at a lower quantity. But at the end of the day, rather than just looking at this as a life support system, what Doctor said just now is we could really use this time to pivot our startups to at least a regional level. In order to do that, we must solve real problems. Now, the pandemic has only further highlighted serious problems that we had before. If public health was not okay before, now we're seeing the impact of it fully, like PPEs not being enough. How do you use 3D printers maybe to help? All this cannot be done on a small scale. So maybe there's a chance, a silver lining here, to look at ASEAN with the whole GDP and big population thing and combine maybe a few countries startup to start off on this. Maybe that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Kamal. I think that's a really interesting idea, whereby we don't see this just as a Malaysian opportunity, but as an opportunity for our companies to go beyond and reach other markets. And yes, there are opportunities to kind of work with other startups and other firms out there and to form like a regional play. And so for this reason, we think like it's really important to look at this from a macro perspective and not look at this just as we're just trying to do life support and to save certain companies. We're really trying to do some transformation in the market. The other thing we noticed is that the industry of tomorrow is going to be very different from the one we left in March. We're going to have a very different world. We're going to be used to video conferencing like this more often. We're going to be used to students have been working from home. People are going to be working, exercising remotely. Healthcare will change forever. Maybe we'll all be wearing masks for many, many years to come. Maybe we'll have to have contact tracing apps to follow us wherever we go. And so we are in an interesting position as Malaysia to kind of reinvent our startup ecosystem to support this, which is why we've recommended support to venture capital firms, to angel investors and accelerators, and also grants to kind of stimulate innovation in these new arenas and industries.
Yes. Doc, I'm going to give the last words to you. We have about 1 or 2 minutes left. So many people believe that big corporations, Fortune 500 companies, just look at the numbers that have fallen off over the last 10 to 20 years. There are new companies in there. Technology companies form out the top 10 and everything else like that. And all companies are like tankers, they say. It can't turn fast enough. Startups are like speedboats or jet skis where they can pivot to new problems, unprecedented problems like the pandemic. So please paint to us, as a country, Malaysia, and maybe the region, why do we need startups, especially all this stimulus thing we're talking about? Because maybe they are the ones fast enough to innovate and fast enough to scale up and fast enough to come up with a new normal.
Thank you, Kamaru. Actually, you kind of said all of this already. If you look at the world, it's a different world today. It has been changing for the last decade or so. And if you look at what's going to happen in the next decade, it's going to be significantly different. Even like today, if we didn't have all of these things, Zoom and Skype and, all this, how would we carry on with our life today? So technology is going to be part of our very lives, whether it's in business, whether it's in society, whether it's within families, right? And we all now cannot live with technology.
Okay.
The large corporates are not innovators. They are not able to innovate and come up with the new technologies or the technologies of the future.
Okay.
The only ones that can do this are the startups and the
Okay.
innovators in all of those startups. For that very reason alone, if Malaysia wants to go up the value chain and make a difference to our citizens, our rakyat, we have to support startups so that we support innovation, and this innovation will make a change in our economy and in our lives. For that very reason, our government must take a more serious look at supporting startups.
Okay.
Because that's the one that's going to make a change in our country and in this region as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. and Aaron.
Thank you so much.
I believe our Minister of Finance, he sort of hacked himself when he was leading a very big local bank, talking about TechFin or FinTech already from a traditional banking perspective. So let's put it across, and maybe we can bounce your ideas together with what he is thinking. So maybe that's one way. But I promise you, this is not the end of the discussion. We'll have another one, maybe with our ASEAN counterparts, and together maybe we can hack the problem and solve this on multiple fronts. So thank you so much to Aaron and Dr. Siva. They are from Scale Up Malaysia and Accelerator, and for them, if we do not help the startups, we are not thinking about the future. Terima kasih. Itu saja untuk agenda Awani malam ini. Kekal tenang, duduk di rumah, dan kita turunkan jumlah kes baru pandemik kepada mungkin hanya 1 angka di Malaysia. InsyaAllah kita jumpa lagi.